Majesty. Dia and I were discussing earlier on, it's quite a special word, actually. And we're going to come into an awakening, a reconnection to the 7 traits that we all already know we have. So first of all, let's look at what is majesty. Majesty originates from a Latin word majestatum. And what it means is, just going to mute everyone. What it means is greatness, dignity, honor, or excellence. That's the meaning of this word majesty. And we're going to uncover the 7 traits. A trait by itself is a distinguishing quality or a characteristic which typically belongs to a person. And in this case, we are really having it belong to the word majesty itself, as if majesty itself is a person. So it is a distinguishing characteristic that belongs to the word majesty. So the first one. Now, this is a pearl of wisdom. A pearl of wisdom is something where even if you just focused on this one pearl of wisdom for the rest of your life, you can actually create a world that works and delivers for everyone. And in a pearl of wisdom, usually when I'm talking about the 7 traits or 7 pathways, I always say go through it in sequence, one after the other. And occasionally I will say you actually don't need to worry about the sequence. With majesty, you do actually go through it sequence by sequence and allow yourself, as I'm sharing the trait and you do the work with the trait, allow yourself to really get that remembrance back about that particular trait. So the first trait is magnanimity. Magnanimous, it literally comes from a Latin word which is magnus, meaning great, and animus, which means soul, a great soul. It describes someone who is big-hearted, someone who shows, they sort of say, like an oversized spirit by being noble or brave, someone who's forgiving of others. Now, the interesting thing in the context of majesty for me is this first trait directly relates to who we truly are. We are a soul being having a human experience. And at a soul level, everything goes. There is a magnanimity that is natural to a soul because it's indestructible. It came here because it chose to come here. It didn't come here with any particular desire to amass anything other than to go through moment by moment experiencing this human form. So there isn't any attachment at a soul level, and there is complete presence at a soul level. Soul being is only about being, and it's having a human experience. That's what is. So magnanimity, a great soul, is what the origin is of this word. This trait connects you, keeps you connected, keeps you stationed in the knowingness of you being a soul being, having a human experience. Now, what does that do? What does that do is it gets you to, look at whatever occurs in a very different perspective. You don't get overly impacted. You don't get overly, affected by things that may not feel that great. With this particular trait, you're able to return to your soul presence very fast. This particular trait, and I'll just share with you how you can go about working with it. If you did the work that I'm about to share, and you did it with conscious awareness and presence, it gives you access to entering an alpha state. An alpha state is a state that you get to when you're meditating. But you're going to do this with conscious awareness, eyes wide open, when you work with this particular trait, and magnanimity in you starts to land, and you start to recognize that. I always like when you're working with the pearls of wisdom, I always like for them to be anchored in reality, in a three-dimensional reality. So given that it means, a great soul, someone who's big-hearted, with an oversized spirit, noble, forgiving, the first thing to do is to really look at where in your life you have displayed these characteristics of being big-hearted, being forgiving. Like something occurs and you don't even show any resentment. You may feel it momentarily and it passes. Where in your life have you experienced that? Where in your life have you experienced the big-heartedness with which you've shared whatever it is that you have to share? Like really go through that and look at where you have done this. When I ask you to look at where in your life, I always say, the easier way of doing it is to literally go back 5 years, go back 10 years, go back 15 years, go as far back as you can remember. And every time you discover something, you anchor it so beautifully and a remembrance returns. Your mind knows you've done this before and you were safe. You survived. Your thoughts start to recognize the feel of it, and both the mind and the thoughts relax. And you can go about owning your trait of magnanimity and show up like that in your majesty. So, when I did this for myself, I found many, 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 many instances. But I really looked at a particularly difficult time in my life. This is very early on in my career where this was when I had just moved to London and I'd taken on a job. And it was with the Hong Kong and Shanghai Bank, HSBC. And I was heading the integration of their financial services, computer systems of a leasing vertical that they were acquiring companies all over the world for. And I was heading that. So it was a new job and I was literally immersed in it, moving forward, wanting to prove that it was a good choice that they had made. I did have some very peculiar traits for an English working environment. I dressed a little bit differently. And at that point, and so there was a lot more color in my clothes, as opposed to just the usual gray, black, blue outfits. Skirts had more flair to them than the usual A-line blue, gray, beige outfits that the rest of them wore. So I didn't realize initially that people would talk about it behind my back. And fortunately, I wasn't very perceptive about those things. I was like so into work, and I didn't understand English humor very much. So even if they made any particular comments, which were meant to be snide remarks, I didn't understand it. So after a while, they stopped doing that. And all I wanted to do was to just keep working. So it was like so one-sided. My life was like so one-sided. And then I was asked to take on Singapore as a region and France as a region. And these two countries were quite different in that they had very rigid internal country-based financial systems, little bit technical stuff here. And Hong Kong and Shanghai Bank had their own. There was lots of negotiation that needed to be done with different authorities to arrive at a system that can be rolled out across all of the companies that were being acquired in those countries. Now, that is where I needed to really own this trait of magnanimity. I didn't know about this at the time, but when I look back, I literally, the way I presented myself was as someone who was big-hearted, someone who was literally being really noble and brave in having done all the work and getting to a particular point, arriving in Singapore, only to find that the authorities were not going to budge from whatever it is that they wanted in their financial reporting. And all of the local managers were, because they had pushed their point of view, it was, the conversations with them were not getting us anywhere. But I had gone and I'd so wanted to get this done that I chose to put myself forward. I was like 24 years old at the time. I put myself forward, and I wore these powerless glasses just to make me look older than I was, and put on this Indian outfit, very traditional Indian outfit, which was okay in Singapore, to make me look older again. And I just allowed the officials to speak. And when they spoke, actually there was nothing wrong in what they were asking. And they weren't asking us, they weren't being rigid at all. It's just that it was never heard with an open heart by anyone. It was like it wasn't a dialogue. It was more like an attack, defense is the type of conversation that was going on. So when I allowed them to fully express, and then I said, okay, I'm not going to react today, but I need to go back and look at what needs to happen in the computer system for us to be able to integrate this. Can we schedule a time in 2 days' time? I didn't know you didn't do things like that. But when I said that, they said yes, and they booked the meeting, and I came back, and ultimately everything worked out. And I was able to get this job completed whilst I was there. I went there for 5 days. I stayed there for 15, but got the job completed. And it was beautiful experience. From that point on, all the snide comments behind my back in England completely stopped. And very soon I got promoted to become a project leader. But it came from owning my majesty and really adopting this trait of magnanimity. And I gave you a work environment. There are so many times we do this in our personal life, in how we show up in terms of supporting our neighbors or friends. Magnanimity is so natural to us. So when I took a very difficult and challenging time in my career, that was a challenging time. The winter was one of the coldest winters we ever had. It was like, and it just so happened that 15 days in that coldest winter time, I was in Singapore enjoying the warmth of that place. So I just realized that, even in that time, so this particular accomplishment where I chose to stand in my majesty, what is this trait? How do you work with once you do uncover it? I'd like to understand the nuances of what that trait enabled for me. And really what it enabled for me was I was steadfast in my focus of what I came there to do. I could easily have just got sucked into, well, how difficult it is, how impossible it is, because these were factors out of our control. We're dealing with government policies and I mean, it wasn't really government policies, but they were all stories. There were just certain ways in which they required reporting from companies. And rather than battle that, which is what our Singapore office had been doing for several months, I just gave them an open-hearted hearing and realized it wasn't that complex. And they rose in their majesty. And we collaboratively co-created something which we did the programming for and actually delivered and implemented. And it was signed off within 2 weeks. 5 months had gone before I arrived there, where it was just a battleground to and fro that was going on. The interesting thing about Majesty is we are born majestic, actually. What's there not to be majestic if you're a soul being, having a human experience? So Majesty is natural to us. So it's ageless. It's gender agnostic, age agnostic, class agnostic, doesn't matter. It is there everywhere. And as I was working through this, actually, I'll talk about the story in the second trait. Let's look at the second trait. The second trait is abound. It's present in large numbers, great quantity, it's prevalent, copiously supplied. Well, because we are born with it. It's natural to us. Now, where did I experience this? Where I saw this play out, Majesty copiously supplied all around me, was when I was a movie producer. And we were producing Bollywood movies as well as English movies and as well as Tamil movies. And I remember, asking my sister, who was the main one who led the Tamil movie production, that why do we have to produce movies which are so loud and, so in your face, and the comedy is so slapstick, and, we have to have lots of songs sung in a squeaky voice and stuff. It all feels so artificial. Why do we have to make movies like that? Why can't we make movies that are for our sensibility? And she said something which really hit me. She said, just remember, we are making movies most for people who are going to make a choice whether they stay at work or, like they drive their rickshaw, or they choose to spend an afternoon instead of working in an air-conditioned environment to be taken to a dream world. So if we are making movies for that audience, it's got to be larger than life, something that really transports them to a world of hope and possibilities. So then my response was that, okay, if we are doing that, then why are we doing previews of these movies where only the elite are invited to the previews? Why don't we do previews in the slums? So she said, well, actually, that's a very obvious question, and fine, we can do this. Just know that people in that who are for whom we are making these movies, they are actually unforgiving. So if the movie doesn't land, then they know that you are the producer in the cinema house, then you'll get rotten eggs and rotten tomatoes and all sorts of stuff. So just be prepared for that. And I was like, yeah, of course, that's all fine. So, our first big multi-star cast movie that was made after this conversation, we decided to do a preview in one of the largest slums, at least in Asia. And I was the producer that went in. Of course, I was dressed very normally, naturally, not at all looking like a producer. And I decided to walk through the slums to get to the cinema house. And when I looked back as I was preparing for our session today, I totally saw this trait of abound. I'm walking through the slums, and there are people who they have tin foils as the roofs, and they still have an antenna and a TV inside. And there are hundreds of such tin shacks that are there. And there are kids that are playing around, laughing, smiling. They don't have a kitchen inside the house, a lot of these places. They are cooking outside. in coal-based stoves. And it's interesting, a lot of the cooking that I saw happening outside was in large woks or large containers. Like someone was making pakora, someone was making something else, and they were just so generously and freely sharing it with people. And kids were like, if they got one little piece of samosa, they were breaking it up into pieces to share it with their friends. And I was like, wow, look at this big heartedness, you know? And we want to go save these people. They really are our teachers. The smiles were so authentic. They were literal beamier than any smile. I'd like forgotten how to smile at that point. And I'd lived in England for long enough and trained to do the stiff upper lip and smile with just a tiny little smirk and absolutely no teeth showing type thing. And here they were in hysterical laughter and playing around and playing with like toys made out of old boxes and stuff. And actually, I saw a phenomenal cultural integration as well. There were Muslims and there were Hindus, and they were sharing water and food and talking and chatting and gossiping and telling someone off, or um, just talking naturally, as opposed to sitting in a cafe and putting on a pretense. None of that was there. Majesties truly abound. The greatness of our soul really does presence itself in large numbers. It is copiously supplied naturally because that is who we really are. Fast forward many years later, like more than a decade later, when we had the pandemic experience, and I had my house help. Of course, nobody could come home, but she was at home, really concerned for me, especially when I had COVID, that, how am I coping with all of this? And there were no shops were open, and there was very little money, if anything, and there was very few places to go spend it if you needed to. And yet, this amazing woman, talk about majesty, copiously supplied, would prepare this food, and her son would brave the police charges on people that were, walking around or driving in their scooters, to bring that food to me, because she was very aware that I eat a particular type of salt and I eat a particular type of bread, which is, wheat free and stuff. And she made sure that that occurred. I mean, it's like, my goodness, majesty in action. So the great news is, just know you are a soul being having a human experience. So these traits exist naturally, and you have seen them in you. You've seen yourself show up like this as a great soul who is big-hearted. And this big-heartedness is copiously supplied. There's a natural spirit of generosity that we are born with. Because remember, as a soul being, you're limitless. You're indestructible. So what's there to amass? Anything. This whole idea of time, and that there's very little time to achieve something. You play it as a game. That's different than becoming very attached to anything and harming others. There's no need for any of that. This particular pearl of wisdom, that's why Majesty is a pearl of wisdom. It presences you to the limitlessness of you. It gets you to recall how indestructible you actually are. And there is a natural greatness as you honor the soul presence that you are, which has lived God knows how many years, millennia maybe even. And when you're plugged into your soul presence and you get into this understanding, you're having a human experience, in the innate vibe of being human, which is love and it's amplifying, go forth and amplify your majesty. It comes naturally. The third trait of majesty is jubilant. Jubilant of feeling and expressing of great happiness and triumph. There's a natural vibe of rejoicing that is inbuilt in this trait of jubilant. You feel a sense of accomplishment and fulfillment as you go along, moment by moment. I mean, I truly felt as I was walking through that slum, it's etched in my memory, that whole experience. Were there beggars? Yes. Were there beggars who, had one of their arms chopped off, which might have been done by a local mafia? Yes, that was there. And everything coexisted. At the same time as kids running around teasing each other, including teasing the beggars. I'm so grateful to have had that walkabout. There was truly a feeling and expression of great happiness and triumph. And all that gets highlighted, is adversity. Everything coexists in moments of. So this is how I went about working with this trait. Everything coexists, even in times of great adversity. There is still something there to be jubilant about. Jubilance coexists with adversity. But where there is jubilance, there doesn't have to be adversity. Where there is adversity, jubilance still exists. Because after all, we are a soul presence. And as a soul being, you are in your majesty naturally. So I thought, okay, let me find those times of great adversity in my life. And there was one particular time where I'd finally decided that I'm actually going to get a divorce. And I had, I had left home and decided to come back. And I was staying at a YWCA in Victoria, in London. There was my son and me. We had actually escaped a really huge domestic violence situation and gone off to India. And that was a time where my son squealed to my parents about his dad hitting his mom. So it was all decided that I was going to come back and get a divorce. But it was going to be quite, I didn't want to go home just in case something worse occurred. So stayed at YWCA. And we didn't actually have, winter clothes as such. We just literally picked up our bags and left for India, not knowing whether I was ever coming back. And I came back. And, this point now I've become a single parent, really important for me to earn. So I had to actually admit to my boss what was going on at home. And we lived in this one room, made lots of stories and created little spaces in that room to be able to play some games and stuff. He couldn't go back to the school that he went to. So there was lots of stuff. It was like lots of stuff that really needed to be managed. And it really felt like quite a significant time of adversity. So in doing this majesty work, I'm looking at, okay, if jubilance exists in moments of adversity, what was there at that time that I could feel jubilant about? And I realized that level of bonding with my son, I would say it's at the foundation of our relationship that we have with each other. The level of self-expression, I mean, he was only little, he was 2.5 years old, right? However, we were together. We created games, we made up stories, you know. Um, we found his favorite places to eat, my favorite places to eat, favorite ways of traveling. I mean, we traveled in a car all the time before this. At this point, there was no car, so we were actually walking and busing and, using the train and making up stories about the train driver and the meeting Thomas the Tank Engine and all sorts of stuff. And I mean, going back, I had to think about that time as a time of adversity because there was so much that of my memories related to that time were about jubilance. We were expressing great happiness, and there was a sense of triumph. It was as if, yes, all of this stuff was there that others would say, oh, poor you. I didn't feel a poor you. I felt like I had seized control. I mean, to me, that was like adversity in from all different directions that was coming at me. And at the same time, there was something so powerful and foundational that continues to give me that great happiness and triumph. And I remember we had to just create stories, like, so we would pretend that a pillow was an alien that had landed on our bed and stuff, and make up a story out of that, or anything. I mean, my God, it brought out the creativity in me. And it's that experience, like I heard my son say to his son, who turned 5 actually just this year, about how that he made up stories with me. So the little one says, yeah, Mynoo makes up stories with me too, and I love spending time with her because we create great stories. My expertise in story making out of nothing came from that moment of great adversity in my life. So how you work with this, it's we all have moments of adversity. And sometimes we've just brushed it aside or pushed it away. With the Majesty lens, because the Majesty lens naturally puts you firmly stations you as a soul presence, soul being. You have that inner strength with which you can use the Majesty lens and look at a moment of adversity in your life and see what you discover as times of great jubilance and anchor it. Times of great happiness and triumph that you are expressing. What I found for myself, because I got into that level of centeredness within myself, I had great support from my board, and to be able to come back to work. I had one of the board directors literally gave me a wing of his office. And this is a huge multinational organization. So I moved the 54 people that worked for me into this new office that we were able to work from. It also introduced the idea of having a creche in the premises for young mothers that worked for us, which didn't exist at that time at all. It was my time of adversity, which I required it. And I was the head of marketing and IT, and I thought it'll make a really great story, and I require it. So why don't we just do this? And sure enough, it made many headlines in a very positive, proactive way. So much came out that is worthy of great happiness and triumph, not just to me, but to so many people around me. The fourth trait, I start losing track of time at this point. Fourth trait is enthusiastic. The fourth trait of Majesty is enthusiastic, showing intense and eager enjoyment, interest, and approval. So when you step into your Majesty, you naturally imbibe this vibe of enthusiasm. I often choose enthusiastic over the word excitement. So if I want to say that I'm really excited, I go into, am I excited? Which is fabulous, but it passes. Or am I really enthusiastic, where I own that eager enjoyment? And I really approve myself of taking this on, and now I see why I choose enthusiastic. It's a word that is very much in the vibe of your soul presence. So in the context of discovering this trait, what will be useful for you to work with here is to really connect with what does it feel like in your body when you experience this enthusiastic experience. How does it feel in your body? What sort of words do you use? What do you look like when you are in the space of being enthusiastic? So for that, it's useful to pick 5 to 10 moments where you've had this enthusiastic feeling so that you can fully own what it's like, feeling and experiencing that enthusiasm. Eager enjoyment, interest, or approval. So I have to say, I mean, even that um, the stressful situation, time of adversity that I was talking about, and when I started going back to work, I was super enthusiastic going to work. I was super enthusiastic coming back from work about what are we going to co-create today with my son. And we lived in Victoria, and he did start going back to school, which was more towards where my work was. So we traveled together in the morning to school, dropped him off, and picked him up. So it was like every step of the way, he was enthusiastic about this amazing time we were having together. And I was enthusiastic. And I was able to feel very complete leaving him at school and then going into work, knowing that I had whatever 5 hours or something of accomplishing 10 hours of work. So there was a time of great creativity and innovation that came up. I also evolved in my own leadership at that time. So delegation was a very huge achievement of that time. And being able to tune into other people's majesty. Even though I never delegated to some of these people previously, because it was the need of the hour, I started plugging into what's really uniquely majestic about this person. I didn't use the term majesty. It was more about what is their special gift, what is their special genius. And I started allocating people in line with their genius. So everyone felt that sense of accomplishment. Like we were having this happiness and triumph and rejoicing celebrations so often because everyone was feeling that sense of accomplishment. And it came out of this situation of great distress and need. Being enthusiastic calls you to actually show that intense, eager enjoyment and interest. And for me, that was a very important aspect because it gave me permission. It allowed me to be silly as opposed to as stern and stiff and strict as I used to be at work. I was so fussy about work is work and home is home. And lo and behold, I go through a situation where, you know, my son was too young and to separate in this way. So he learned to attend board meetings from a very young age. He just sat quietly as an observer, as an understudy. This whole idea of, integrating work and home life started to show up, and initially I was stressed about it, but when I took on being enthusiastic about it, it actually was so much easier. Time of great accomplishment for me. So look at it for yourself. And by the time you get to the enthusiastic trait discovery, you've already gone through the magnanimous, abound, and jubilant traits. So enthusiasm comes so naturally at this point. Let's look at the fifth trait. The fifth trait is sacrosanct. Majesty is valuable. It's almost too valuable to be interfered with. And because it is connected to your soul being, you can't interfere with it. It is there. It is here to stay. You cannot destroy it. You cannot destroy. No one can destroy it. Even you cannot destroy it. That's the great part about it. Majesty is sacrosanct. How exciting is that? That in itself is worthy of, being jubilant about. So here also, this is interesting, as the discovery of these traits really calls for you to go back into moments of times of great adversity, great distress in your life, and discover how majesty was still thriving. Doesn't just survive, because majesty it's an isness of your existence. It thrives. It thrives in times of great abundance. It thrives in times of great adversity. You can take my word for it. And I invite you, since you're here listening to this Pearl of Wisdom, to examine your life and see how majesty is sacrosanct, too important or valuable to be interfered with. There's so many situations that you'll find where you always held that majesty within you. I would say, this sacrosanct aspect is so visible when you see your domestic pets. Even if they're going through a difficult health condition themselves, or even if the environment in the house is such that it is deeply debilitating emotionally for them and for others, they still remain in their majesty. Even if their mama or papa is not that nice to them, they still remain in their majesty. They never lose their sense of loyalty, their deep sense of purpose. Cats, doesn't matter, they will do what they will do. They're so majestic in how they carry themselves. The expression is different. How a dog expresses jubilance and enthusiasm is quite different than how a cat does. Or even a hamster. It's like, this is pretty phenomenal. The sacrosanct is so visible in the animal kingdom, and it is actually very visible when you go back and look at your life. Yes. Jaya Zadi. The sixth trait is tenacious. Tenacity is displayed by people by them never giving up, never stop, like really not stopping, not allowing anything to stop them from accomplishing their goals. So the good news is majesty is a natural occurrence. It is the state of you in your soul presence. So the soul presence remains soul presence. So the majesty that it is never gives up on you and your human form with all the fractures that might come in. It never gives up on your ability to reconnect to your own magnanimity, because majesty simply is. So here what I did was, the revelation I had was, so my tenacity of like never giving up and constantly moving forward no matter what has occurred, where does that come from? It comes from the majesty of my soul being. Now, if I have that ability, so does everyone else. So you can choose to give up and you can choose to keep going, remaining very connected and focused to the intention that you are here to fulfill. Whatever it may be aliveness, it may be getting out of a particular situation. Whatever it is in that moment. I mean, I applied the tenaciousness when I moved to a new country, I was going to have a flourishing life and a flourishing career. And it didn't matter that I didn't dress the way that everyone else dressed, or there were snide remarks behind my back. I still just tenaciously kept going. And lo and behold, it didn't take very long, only a few months, for people to realize what there was that I was bringing to the table, to the organization. I was so clear throughout, actually. There's that eternal optimist in me. And there's also that eternal belief that we all have infinite potential. And it's literally just just a function of us not utilizing or not recognizing the opportunities that come our way. And the more I have gone through spiritual awakenings, I have a very different relationship to, an opportunity. To me, every moment is a moment of opportunity to rise in your majesty, which it is, given that you are a soul being anyway, having a human experience. Every time you experience being human, good, bad, ugly, beautiful, it's like literally opening the doors for you to rise in your majesty. And the interesting thing is, as a soul being having a human experience, it tenaciously never gives up, keeps going. So it comes naturally to us. You can spend time wallowing about how certain things didn't quite turn out the way they should, and I wish, and why me, and all of that. But you can always come back. It's never too late. It's just simply never too late. Because your soul presence is eternal. This particular trait is the one that is at the foundation of vibrant vitality. And that is what makes majesty, like, it is age defying. It is like literally, doesn't matter whether you're rich, you're poor, you're old, you're young, you're, whatever color you are, whatever sexual preference you have, you all are in your majesty. That is a natural state of being. Just show up and keep going. Don't need to put blinkers on, see life for how it is occurring, make a conscious choice to keep alive. I mean, like, really come alive. Applying tenacity to thriving instinct is a very different experience to applying tenacity, the tenaciousness, to survival. You don't have to apply to survival anymore. You can arrive at what is a thriving strategy in this regard and go for that. Just never give up on thriving, because survival is taken care of when you do that. Always ground it in reality so that an awakening takes place at a cellular level. So when you look back at various times in your life where you displayed this tenaciousness, where you kept going, it is mostly positive. Tenacious is mostly positive in the way it is used. I'm using it in that positive way and applying it to the trait of majesty. This knowledge, I mean, I think Stephanie's just talked about grounding. Literally, you've taken the word out of my mouth. I was about to say, this particular trait keeps you grounded. Literally, it's like you lay down your roots, owning your majesty enables you to expand infinitely. It's infinitely expansive. The seventh trait is a pretty cool one. I never edit the words I get because they are literally transmissions. And the word I got for the seventh was YOLO, YOLO. And I thought, is this even a real word? And it is actually. It's an abbreviation for you only live once. And so it's really like a YOLO lifestyle or YOLO modus operandi. It's a modern version of the Latin carpe diem, seize the day. And for me, it is more like seize the moment. Every moment is a moment of leverage. So what if that was true? And, just play the game, even if you don't believe it is. Seize the moment. Because really, the only purpose to you having the gift of life, which is the state in which you are breathing, is to come alive. How do you come alive? By living your life to the fullest. Even if it means embracing difficult situations, embracing and owning up to some odd behavioral choices. You may as well just own up to it. And really, go for it, despite the good, the bad, the ugly, or the beautiful that might have occurred in your life. Hence, the unconditional acceptance strategy is an important one. I mean, when I look at the time of great adversity that I talked about, where we were staying in YWCA and I was regrouping my life with my son, I mean, I tell you, I had no idea that this is what we were doing. We were seizing the moment. Because I was so present to, I wasn't going to be here with this child all day, every day, because I would need to go to work. So it couldn't be seize the day, it had to be seize the moment. So it was moment by moment, and that is what gave me that amazing awareness of how much ability we have, how abundant it is to live your life in the moment. And when you're seizing the moment to come alive and doing so moment by moment, your vital life force, the energy that you have, the creativity that becomes natural to you presents itself. Majesty is totally sacrosanct, cannot be interfered with. When you adopt this trait, the YOLO trait, living your life to the fullest, moment by moment, using every moment as a moment of leverage, leverage to come alive.